Conservative all-stars headlining this week's CPAC convention, where a big question seems to be, what will it take for the GOP to unite? Some key stars looking to take the party in different directions, including the top two finishers in Saturday's straw poll, Rand Paul and our next guest, Ted Cruz, who in less than 2 years has shot from obscurity to Republican star. Here's Jonathan Karl.
The Conservative Political Action Conference, CPAC, like Woodstock for right-wingers. 3 days of music and tough talk.
The President of the United States is treating our Constitution worse than a placemat at Denny's.
It's the year's biggest gathering of possible Republican presidential candidates.
The policies they pursue have never worked. And they work less now than ever before.
If that's your attitude, Mr. President, what the hell are we paying you for?
I believe what you do on your cell phone is none of their damn business.
CPAC brings together the right and far right. Libertarians, gun enthusiasts, Tea Partiers. The woman running this booth has a new favorite, Ted Cruz.
Even if it's going to hurt him politically, he will stand behind his principles. He's a man of principles.
How's it going?
It's fantastic.
We caught up with Senator Cruz at CPAC.
Well, thank you for being here.
He was a virtual unknown just a year ago. Not anymore.
The Affordable Care Act that will destroy.
Cruz led the fight over Obamacare that shut the government down last fall. More recently, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has opened up a new line of attack for Cruz against President Obama.
A critical reason for Putin's aggression has been President Obama's weakness. That Putin fears no retribution. Their policy has been to alienate and abandon our friends and to coddle and appease our enemies. And so Putin, you better believe Putin sees in Benghazi 4 Americans are murdered. And nothing happens. There's no retribution. You better believe that Putin sees that in Syria, Obama draws a red line and ignores the red line.
Okay, so how would you stand up? What would you do? Military action?
No, look.
None at all. Sanctions? Would you do sanctions?
Absolutely, yes. There are a host of things we can do. Let's rewind the clock a little bit. Number one, don't demonstrate weakness for 5 years. We've seen historically over and over again tyrants respond to weakness.
I mean, let's not forget that they invaded Georgia when George W. Bush was president.
Well,
so this is not,
but look,
Obama didn't invent Putin's aggression.
But I will tell you, when Mitt Romney talked about Putin expanding his sphere of influence, Obama mocked him, said the Cold War's been over 20 years, nothing to be worried about. And we keep making that mistake with Putin. Putin is a KGB thug. When the protests began in Ukraine, the president should have stood unapologetically, emphatically for freedom. And when the United States doesn't speak for freedom, tyrants notice.
Cruz's approach stands in stark contrast with fellow Tea Partier Rand Paul. Just days before Putin invaded Crimea, Paul said, quote, "I think we need to have a respectful, sometimes adversarial, but a respectful relationship with Russia."
Senator Rand Paul said, some on our side are so stuck in the Cold War era, they want to tweak Russia all the time. And I don't think that's a good idea. What's your reaction to that?
I'm a big fan of Rand Paul. He and I are good friends. I don't agree with him on foreign policy. I think U.S. leadership is critical in the world. And I agree with him that we should be very reluctant to deploy military force abroad. But I think there is a vital role, just as Ronald Reagan did. When Ronald Reagan called the Soviet Union an evil empire, when he stood in front of the Brandenburg Gate and said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall," those words changed the course of history. The United States has a responsibility to defend our values.
Senator Paul agreed to be interviewed on This Week to give his perspective. But at the last minute, he backed out. On stage, Cruz also blasted fellow Republicans he sees as too wishy-washy, including 3 of the biggest GOP names over the last 3 decades.
All of us remember President Dole and President McCain and President Romney. Now look, those are good men, they're decent men, but when you don't stand and draw a clear distinction, when you don't stand for principle, Democrats celebrate.
And once again, the old guard fired back.
I wonder if he thinks that Bob Dole stood for principle on that hilltop in Italy when he was so gravely wounded.
But upsetting well-established Republicans is precisely how Cruz quickly became one of the right's biggest, most controversial stars. He's utterly unfazed by the return fire he's taking from those who say he's hurting the party with his brand of no-compromise politics.
So the Wall Street Journal called you a minority maker, and I took a little heat for saying at that Tuesday lunch they have every Tuesday, he's going to need a food taster. So tell me, have you considered that?
Well, John, I will tell you, you've actually become somewhat of a folk hero back in Texas. We went back, and I had multiple gatherings where people came up and actually asked if they could serve as the food tasters.
If Republicans win back the Senate this fall, he vows to push even harder.
You had a very big applause line out here. You said, we will repeal
every single word of Obamacare.
We can acknowledge that's not going to happen while Barack Obama's president, right?
Yeah, I'll give you one scenario where it could. If there's one thing that unifies politicians of both parties, is their top priority is preserving their own hide. And if enough congressional Democrats realize they either stand with Obamacare and lose, or they listen to the American people and have a chance at staying in office, that's the one scenario we could do it in 2015. If not, we'll do it in 2017.
So you honestly think there's a chance that you could get Obamacare repealed? Every word, as you say.
Every
with
single
Obama
word.
In the White House.
You know, what's funny, John, is the media treats that as a bizarre proposition.
Well, it is, because he's not going to sign it. It is a bizarre proposition.
It is the most unpopular law in the country. Millions of people have lost their jobs, have lost their health care, have been forced into part-time work, have their premiums skyrocketing. And right now, Washington isn't listening to those people. That's how we win elections. That's also how we repeal Obamacare.
In other words, expect an even feistier Ted Cruz if Republicans win big in the fall. For This Week, Jonathan Karl, ABC News, Washington.